The diner had been loud all morning, plates clattering, coffee pouring, truckers arguing over football. But when the door opened and a disabled Navy SEAL stepped inside on crutches with a military K9, the room went strangely quiet. He looked around the packed diner for a place to sit. One table after another suddenly became reserved. One man even pulled his chair closer to the table like the veteran might steal it. The SEAL didn't argue. He just nodded politely and kept moving. Until he stopped beside the counter where a young waitress named Olivia was pouring coffee. "Ma'am, would it be all right if I sat here?" Before she could answer, the K9 beside him suddenly locked up like a statue, staring directly at Olivia. And what the dog did next made the entire diner realize this waitress wasn't just a waitress. If stories about quiet heroes and unexpected moments of respect mean something to you, take a second to subscribe and let me know where you're watching from in the comments, because the moment you're about to hear about started in a place so ordinary that nobody inside that diner realized they were about to witness something they would talk about for years. The diner had been loud all morning. Plates clattered against tables, coffee mugs slid across the counter, and the low hum of conversations bounced off the old tiled walls. Truckers argued about football scores. A couple of construction workers laughed loudly near the window. The smell of bacon grease and burnt coffee hung thick in the air like it always did during the breakfast rush. Behind the counter, Olivia moved quickly between customers with the calm rhythm of someone who had been doing this job long enough to read a room without looking directly at anyone. She poured coffee, wiped down the counter, and scribbled orders onto a small notepad clipped to her apron. To most people in that diner, she was just another tired waitress in her early 30s trying to survive another shift. But if someone had been watching closely, they might have noticed the way she moved with unusual precision. Her posture was straight, even after hours on her feet. Her eyes constantly scanned the room in quick, quiet glances. And when a glass slipped from a customer's hand near the end booth, Olivia turned toward the sound before anyone else even realized it had fallen. Small things. The kind of things most people would never notice. But they were there. Olivia didn't talk much while she worked. She kept conversations short and polite, the way people do when they carry thoughts they don't want to share with strangers. The diner owner liked her because she was reliable. Customers liked her because she was calm even when the place was packed. But none of them knew why loud noises sometimes made her pause for half a second before continuing. None of them noticed the thin scar running along the inside of her wrist that disappeared under the edge of her sleeve. And none of them knew that every morning before work, she sat in her car in the parking lot for a few minutes, staring at the steering wheel like she was preparing herself to step into a world that had once been very different. For Olivia, this diner wasn't just a job. It was a quiet place where nobody asked questions. A place where she could move through the day without anyone knowing the parts of her life she had worked very hard to leave behind. The door chime rang sometime around 8:30, but nobody paid much attention at first. The diner door opened dozens of times during a morning rush. Another customer meant another order of eggs, another cup of coffee, another voice joining the background noise of the room. But something about this entrance slowly changed the atmosphere inside the diner. Conversations didn't stop exactly. They simply softened. A few heads turned toward the doorway, then a few more. The man standing there looked like someone who had spent a long time outdoors. His face was weathered beyond his years, his dark jacket worn but clean. One hand gripped a metal crutch supporting his weight. His other hand rested on the harness of a large German shepherd standing calmly at his side. The dog's vest carried a small patch identifying it as a trained military service K9. But what most people noticed first wasn't the dog. It was the neatly folded pant leg pinned just above the man's knee. The disabled Navy SEAL stepped inside slowly, giving his eyes a moment to adjust to the dim light of the diner. The dog walked beside him with quiet discipline, every movement controlled and deliberate. For a few seconds, the man simply looked around the room like any traveler searching for a place to sit. The diner was nearly full. Most of the booths were occupied, but there were still empty seats scattered across different tables. Plenty of space for someone to join a group for breakfast. The veteran moved toward the first open booth where two middle-aged men were finishing their coffee. His voice was calm and respectful when he spoke. "Mind if I sit here?" he asked, resting lightly on the crutch. The two men exchanged a glance that lasted barely a second. One of them cleared his throat and shook his head. "Sorry," he said quickly. "We're waiting for someone." They weren't. Their plates were nearly empty, and they were already reaching for their jackets. But the veteran simply nodded once like he understood the message and moved on. At the next table, a young couple avoided eye contact before he could even ask. The man slid closer to the center of the booth, pretending to scroll through his phone. At another table, a family with 2 children suddenly decided they needed more space. The mother offered a polite smile that carried just enough discomfort to make it clear the answer was no. The veteran never argued. He never raised his voice. Each time he was turned away, he simply nodded again and shifted his weight on the crutch before moving to the next table. But something about the pattern was beginning to spread quietly through the diner. People were watching now, watching a man who had clearly sacrificed something for his country politely ask for a place to sit, while every table found a reason not to make room. Even the dog seemed to notice the tension building around them. The K9 stayed perfectly calm, its sharp eyes moving slowly across the room, as if studying each person who looked away. Behind the counter, Olivia had seen the entire thing unfold without saying a word. She watched the veteran move from table to table. She noticed the way his shoulders stayed relaxed even when people refused him. She noticed the careful way he balanced his weight so the crutch barely made a sound on the floor. And she noticed something else most people in the diner didn't. The dog wasn't just any service animal. The way it walked, the way it held its posture, the way it kept its attention on the man beside it. Those were signs of specialized training. Military training. Olivia felt a strange tension pull at the back of her mind, the same instinctive awareness that sometimes surfaced when she saw certain details other people ignored. For a moment, she looked down at the coffee pot in her hand, debating something quietly with herself. Then she did something that seemed very small, but would change everything about that morning. "Sir," she called gently from behind the counter. The veteran turned toward her voice. Olivia slid the empty stool beside the counter outward with one hand and gave a small nod. "You can sit here if you'd like." For the first time since walking into the diner, the veteran's guarded expression softened slightly. He moved toward the counter carefully, positioning the crutch against the side of the stool before lowering himself onto the seat. The German Shepherd settled beside him without needing a command. For a moment, the diner returned to its normal rhythm. Conversations slowly restarted. Plates clattered again. Someone laughed near the window. Olivia poured a cup of coffee and placed it in front of the veteran like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. But just as she turned to refill another customer's mug, something unexpected happened. The K9 suddenly froze, not barking, not growling, just completely still. Its ears lifted sharply as its eyes locked directly onto Olivia. Then the dog slowly stood up and walked toward her. The entire diner began to notice the silence spreading again as the trained military K9 stopped in front of the waitress, sat perfectly upright, and stared at her like it had just recognized someone it hadn't seen in years. The disabled SEAL watched the scene unfold, confusion slowly replacing the calm expression on his face, because military K9s only reacted like that for one reason. And as the dog remained perfectly still in front of Olivia, the veteran leaned forward slightly and asked a quiet question that made her heart skip a beat. "Ma'am, have we met before?" For a moment, Olivia didn't answer. The question hung in the air between them while the German Shepherd remained perfectly still at her feet, its posture rigid and attentive. Around them, the diner had gone unusually quiet again. Customers who had been whispering or pretending not to watch were now openly staring at the strange scene unfolding near the counter. Olivia forced herself to keep moving, reaching for the coffee pot like nothing unusual had happened. She poured another cup for a customer 2 stools down, wiped the counter with a small towel, and tried to ignore the weight of the dog's gaze fixed on her. But when she finally looked back toward the veteran, she noticed something that made her chest tighten slightly. He wasn't watching the dog. He was watching her, carefully. Like someone trained to read people the same way other men read maps. "I don't think so," Olivia replied quietly, her voice calm but controlled. She gave a small shrug as if the moment meant nothing. I've worked here a long time, though. Maybe you passed through before. It was a reasonable answer. Ordinary. But the veteran didn't respond immediately.